So Mark, well, thank you for agreeing to doing this. It's wonderful to see you
Absolutely.
again.
It's been a lot of years by now, hasn't it?
It has been.
Yeah.
Quite a few years.
Yeah.
I mean, we've both known each other from the carbon markets.
Yeah.
And we both, I think, reinvented our careers over the last 7 or 8 years.
Were you part of the team that was on our IPO at Norton Rose back in 2005?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
So this is the IPO of EcoSecurities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I couldn't remember. I think that's when we first started really encountering each other, because you joined Norton Rose right around then, right? Or just a little bit before that, or did you cross over into
2007 I joined
Norton Rose? Okay, then it would have been, our IPO was in 2005, so that wouldn't have been that then.
But I was involved on the Baker McKenzie side.
Oh, that's right. The
yes.
Baker.
Yes.
Right.
So, but I mean, so you know, if we go right back,
Yep.
I mean, you were one of the first kind of entrepreneurs in the climate space.
I mean, as I said, I got into sort of this low carbon finance space back in 1993. You know, the very first projects around, you know, what was called activities implemented jointly, and then a couple years later, that all sort of turned into, you know, Pedro and I, you know, started EcoSecurities in '97, you know, a year before Kyoto,
which ended up being one of the biggest, you know, in that first phase of the carbon market.
Yeah, I mean,
one of the biggest companies out there.
Yeah, I mean, again, we always said, you know, it was many years of not knowing what was going to happen, and then all of a sudden it was just, you know, kind of crazed. And you know, we always said in every market there's one or two companies that come from the bottom up and everybody else comes in laterally, and our aim was to be one of the one or two that came from bottom up, and you know, somehow or another we pulled it off.
But 93, I mean, that's even way before the Kyoto Protocol, the first.
About 4 years, but I mean, you remember there were early utilities. You know, the Dutch utility industry, AES, New England Electric Power, a couple others that were doing these sort of experimental projects around that, mainly around forestry, and that's where we originally came into the market.
Yes. So there's two questions, and I don't know which to ask first that raises. I mean, one, you know, how did you get into the space? I mean, how did you see the opportunity? And I think two, keep this in mind, you know, back in '93, and we are still talking about many of the things that need to be done.
Yep.
I mean, it's unbelievable. Back now in 2018, and this GCAS, you know, summit, we're still trying to build that momentum and action. Yet, someone like you saw what was needed back in '93.
I mean, you know, you asked. I mean, I was just doing basically still incomplete PhD in what essentially were environmental markets. I was working with a professor who had gotten some money from a foundation to look at various forms of environmental markets that were emerging at that time. These were just starting with the lead markets and some fisheries markets, and SO2 had become a market. And one of the projects we looked at was carbon, and one thing led to another, and I ended up doing some consulting work that summer for a group that brokered one of the first projects, and away, you know, you sort of looked at it and you said, well, if this ever goes, it's going to be absolutely gigantic because it's pretty much the entire global economy. So it's a relatively interesting, you know, place to make a bet, but you know, you're going to have to make a bet that the world is eventually going to take this seriously. And I think your point is well taken. That you know that from we're 25 years now since I started. Damn. Sorry, why did you have to do that to me? A quarter of a century, and you know, and again, you can see enormous amounts of progress, you know, both sociologically, technologically, financially. I mean, we're doing amazing things, but at the same time, we've added 2 billion people to the planet in that period of time.
Wow.
You know, or something in that neighborhood. I mean, we've industrialized China. You know, we've done enormous amounts of things on the other side of the carbon ledger. Yet at the same time, we are seeing progress. The question is, are we going to make it there in time? And it's hard to say. I mean, we won't know for well past our lifetimes.
So many people joining us for this conversation, I mean, they might wonder, I mean, you know, how do you make a market out of environmental goods and services and rights? I mean, they might even question.
Well, I mean, again, it's a, you know, when you are in a situation in which you have multiple participants that have to meet a target, either mainly because of regulation, legislation, or theoretically a target because of their own corporate ethos or personal ethos, whatever it may be, and you can't do it. I mean, if I own a gasoline car and I'm going to drive around for the 1990s and 2000s up until fairly recently, I only owned gasoline cars. You know, there was no way I could actually participate in life without burning, fossil emissions.
Yeah.
You can't do, I can't fly in planes without fossil emissions. I can't do anything. Everything we do is about that. So in that transition, of course, there were going to have to be needs to create flexible ways of getting there. You just can't turn everything to zero, and some people can do it quickly and others can't. And a market allows multiple participants to collectively figure out the best, the cheapest path to whatever the policy wants to get to. And I think that the idea that everybody should do exactly the same thing, nobody's circumstances are exactly the same.
So you had you were incredibly successful with Eco-Securities. It was very prescient.
Got lucky.
You got lucky, but I mean, incredibly prescient in terms of seeing the development of these environmental markets, particularly in the climate space. I mean, what were the main challenges of building that business? I mean, people must have, at one point, and I had these conversations myself, people must have thought you were insane. You're going to make a business out of what?
You should have seen the conversations with my father-in-law. Yeah, I mean, again, it was a sort of a one-off. I mean, the reality is that there was a lot of work being done around these ideas during the time. I mean, we survived, as consultants in the space. There were just, everybody was sort of seeing this was an interesting architecture. The UN, the UN, Rio and then Kyoto had both created sort of at least a framework around which these things could happen. So, environmental organizations, governments, industry associations, development agencies, et cetera, all sort of saw that they had an interest in this space, and we're trying to figure out what to do. And we carved out essentially an advisory role around that. I mean, I think the phrase "in the land of the blind, one eye" is pretty good. And we at least pretended we had one eye open, but we built some of the first, some of the core parts of what became the architecture of the system. And that wasn't just us; that was many hundreds of people from many different guises. But we were there at the beginning. And
but for someone of your obvious intelligence, drive, intuition,
just stubbornness, really, Anthony.
Stubbornness. But there's plenty of other things you could have had a much safer career in numerous. Why this?
This is it's interesting because again I've gotten to the point where I could be safe again, and now I seem to be trying to push myself back towards the edge. I think it's just a personality thing in part. It's just I enjoy taking on challenges that are difficult and that sort of around this issue areas of essentially poorly priced environmental performance, basically, and trying to figure out how you solve it.
But why the environment sustainability space? Again, lots of other areas.
I don't know.
There's
I went hiking a lot
Valley,
as a kid. I went. I liked being outside as a kid. I liked. I don't know. I mean, again, it's it is the single biggest issue out there. You can't really take on something bigger than this. It's the entire atmosphere, energy system, and land use of the planet. So I mean, it has enough room to play in, and I don't know. It was the idea of of business and environment intersecting became a passion really early on, and once you find it, why stop?
And is there something about reorientating the priorities? Because I think anyone in this space who sees what we're facing with climate and coming up against resource constraints, you wonder a lot about. I often wonder about why most people don't see it. What is the, why are people not addressing this in their everyday lives? And I mean, it comes with doing this sort of YouTube channel. I mean, there are incredibly successful YouTubers out there who have millions upon millions of followers because they play video games or they follow tech or whatever it is. But in our space, almost nothing.
Well, again, our space is somewhat obscure. Every day, we have hot days, we have cold days. It feels, but we're still asking everybody to run their lives based upon a scientific extrapolation. Again, we see now finally the real first tentacles of what we think looks like the fingerprint of climate change, but we're still not, to be blunt, 100% sure. We have certain ideas, and there are islands that are slowly going away and whatever, but it's really hard to see in your personal life.
Is this summer being a wake-up? I mean, I was watching something in the gym this morning. I couldn't really hear the sound, but about a Washington Post, I think it's a Washington Post opinion, and basically saying that they hold President Trump complicit in Hurricane Florence. And some commentator was going nuts.
But that's silly. I mean, the reality is that the contribution around this comes from, the reality is, humanity has made a trade, which is its own development for, rolling the dice with the climate. Okay, everything that you and I enjoy as human beings, in our lifestyle, is created by fossil fuels. The reality is we do not move. It moves us and things around. So there's no one of us, any one person that's complicit. You can't stop this right now. All we're trying to do is find ways to mitigate the worst case and adapt.
There are certainly people who are resisting either for whatever reason, ideology doesn't suit them, but. So here's the theme of these conversations is that we're dealing with an issue that's potentially existential to civilization and society. Yet people who I consider, who to me, I count you amongst them, are climate rock stars. Christiana and James Cameron and many of the others that I'm talking to are hardly known, if at all, outside of our climate sustainability bubble. I mean, why is that?
I used to say, let me just to give a digression. I used to say back there was a talk that you know how you have a PowerPoint that you give a couple times over a period of time, and I think it was probably like 2007 or so when I was on that particular part of the circuit of doing this. I used to say if we really took climate seriously, we could identify a low carbon billionaire. And everybody'd say, that makes a good point, because now we at least can identify one. Everybody knows one low carbon billionaire on the planet, and again, I think that's one. That's one. And again, the reality is that because I think Christiana is probably getting somewhere in that neighborhood. But again, think about globally, who are global political figures that meet that standard. I mean, yes, because this is politics. We're not sports. We're not entertainment. We're once you get past Obama and the Pope and things like that, really that sort of, we are global, but we are therefore just part of a very small underlayment of what the global consciousness is. And again, I'm not sure and have we made really an impact? Not sure we have. There's only one guy who might have, and he's the one that everybody knows.
Yeah, well.
Okay.
So you sold Eco-Securities how long ago?
2009, basically right before Copenhagen.
And as you say, phase two was not to take the easy life and the yacht and the beach. You've thrown yourself back in. But in a different, more on the investment and clean tech side.
Well, again, essentially, you sort of evolved into it. I just started making a few, angel investments around, essentially still low carbon and platforms around that, and sort of then recognized that what I was more interested in, I didn't really know technology. I was interested in how project development worked and how you actually built assets in the ground that were facilitative of the low carbon transition. So principally was mainly thinking about renewables and things like that. So we've made some investments around that space. The one that I find most fascinating right now, and again, since I don't think we want to talk about everything, there are renewables. There's some things that that you and I talked about, before the interview about, what does the oil sector look like in a low carbon transition over the next 50 years, which I find a sort of fascinating intellectual question. But the one that right now I'm really spending a lot of my time on is we've actually built, or we're in the process of building, what I think might be one of the first legitimate climate adaptation projects in California. And basically my firm is called Allotrope, and one of my partners introduced us to an idea about basically setting up a specialized wood mill in Northern California to take what's called small diameter timber and turn it into higher value products. And small diameter timber comes from a couple different sources. I mean, it's the kind of timber that you generally can't run through a normal sawmill, but in California we have a vastly too much of this stuff, which is one of the reasons that we have these conflagration forest fires right now.
The big wildfires.
And it's a function of basically a policy mistake of the last 100-odd years in the United States, which is that when we set up the Forest Service in the early 1910s, one of the key mandates of the Forest Service was to put out forest fires.
Right.
Forest fire is an integral part of the ecosystem of the American West. You cannot get away from that. It does not rain in California basically for 7 or 8 months a year. Okay, in that kind of condition, everything will dry out, and whether it's lightning strikes or caused by man, there are going to be forest fires. The question is, how severe are those fires are going to be? And I think you've seen on
if they're multiplied.
Yeah, and if they're enhanced by climate change and hotter air and all these other things. But the fundamental problem is that a system that works like I described there, you will end up with survivor trees, and you end up with very tall trees that survive low intensity fire, and you'll see in old growth, you see all the trees have burn marks on the bottom. They're 200 feet tall, but they're burned on the bottom. Now, by putting fires out, we never had that natural selection process. So now, instead of having forests that have 75 trees an acre, we have forests that have 300 trees an acre. Wow. And so what that ends up doing is it takes more of the water out of the watershed. It creates much less healthy forests, and you end up with forests of very spindly wood that is not commercial, is not particularly a strong carbon sink, is not particularly, it tends to go more monoculture, because there are certain things that only will sprout will only sprout after a fire. I mean, the ecosystem is designed for fire. Okay, and but we end up with, and so when the fire does come, it's conflagration fire. I mean, we are seeing behavior of fire in the West, in the United States, in the last 10 years that's completely unprecedented. Now, it's a combination of climate change and the fuel loading. So what our mill is there to do, and this is something that we've sort of dawned on over the last few months, is that we are there to try to find ways to create value out of that resource. Because it's all well and good to say, okay, let's clear 70% of the biomass from this acreage here. You don't really have an opportunity. What do you do with it then? You can't landfill 100 million trees. Okay, wow, and right now there's really only one policy in California that's being used, which is that the electricity market will pay an extremely high price for electric power that comes from fuel from these high hazard zone areas. It's not a terrible idea, but it's somewhat bizarre that we're using the electricity market to basically manage our land base. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to demonstrate a model where we can actually accelerate actual adaptation to climate change, which is that we need to accelerate moving getting these forests And again, we're not talking huge. At our sort of peak value of our 66-acre facility up in Reading, if we were doing the value of 20,000 acres a year, I'd be dancing in the streets. And this is a multi-million acre problem. So it's just a start, but I think it's the first one, and I'm really really excited to be part of it right now.
So what are the biggest? So you're a climate, a sustainability entrepreneur.
Yeah.
What are the biggest challenges of that? And if someone wants, if someone's watching this and trying to, how do I get involved? How do I play a role in these sort of startups?
I mean, again, the reality is that the main drive still has to be to decarbonize the energy sector. And I think we're in an incredibly interesting point to do that, because we finally have the technologies that can really compete on a cost basis with fossil fuels. We never had that before.
We're at the economic tipping point.
We're at the economic. Every single month there are more sub-markets that are competitive for renewables and storage together. I mean, all energy markets are slightly different. I mean, there's energy markets for transport, in Indonesia, and there's energy markets for electricity. It's highly dependent upon, and again, for years, off-grid diesel has not been competitive with solar and batteries. But now we're at the stage where on-grid major can change. So figuring out particularly how storage and smart grid and how transport all interlink with that, that's where the action in the next 30 years is.
And the opportunities and the risks.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar play.
Yeah. Well, we just did
I'm too old for that. Give me my trees.
The Carbon Tracker just did a big report on the energy transition, Vision 2020, why you should see peak fossil fuels coming. And it does lay out this sort of phases of this transition quite neatly. And actually what is, I think, potentially shocking, interesting, is how quickly you will see the economic recalibration, the economic repricing of equities at very low levels of penetration. But also what we are hearing back from different places where the economic tipping point has happened is there's still resistance. There's still almost a refusal to accept this, and still almost cannot believe that these new technologies are cheaper than the incumbent technology.
Do you want me to give you the one single sentence I will give you that indicates that one of the biggest players in the world believes this? They're trying to take part of Saudi Aramco public. That right there is the single most indicative piece of data I can come up with that the world of oil as a monopoly provider of transportation, which is the key value of it, is over.
Because they see this as the last possible time.
Again, why would you sell? If you really believed you had some, there's no reason if you are the Saudi royal family you would sell unless you had this feeling that there was something going on and maybe this stuff wasn't going to be worth quite as much in the future. And the reality is, if we're going to take the climate, seriously, and I think we are, one way or another, whether it's by markets or whether it's by executive fiat or whatever it is, the $10 trillion oil industry has to become a $2 trillion oil industry. And that's just you will get the highest value out of those, whatever those emissions are. They will presumably be directed at the absolutely highest value, least replicable things that oil can uniquely provide. And oil is a spectacular commodity. I mean, just to be blunt, it has it's driven pretty much the entire world that we've created. But and it will still be used, but there are many more markets in which we can now substitute for oil with other technologies cost effectively or more.
Which create demand destruction
and
drive the transition.
When monopolies fall apart, things get interesting.
Yes. Well, that's perhaps a good place to finish. So
cool.
Mark, thank you. It's been great to catch up.
Excellent.
Great conveation.
Look forward to looking at all these. This looks like a really fun project.
Well, subscribe to the channel, Green and Tonic. Watch this video, watch the other conversations. I think they're very interesting. And join us. Put comments in, and I look forward to engaging with you in future. Thank you, everybody.